Welcome to the SOS Berks First Responder Training Series. Recovery begins here. As a first responder, your first and foremost role is to protect and save lives. This role has become more challenging over the last 5 years as you are responsible for responding to individuals experiencing an overdose or risky behaviors related to substance use disorders. In my role as a chaplain and EMT, I have faced many challenging situations where the patient may have resisted my efforts. These series of short videos will provide insights into how we can use our skills to save lives and serve as connectors to treatment and recovery services. The first video in our series looks at the importance and the use of naloxone.
Narcan, naloxone, is essentially an antidote. It reverses the effects of the opiate.
A lot of people are using Narcan now. It's not uncommon for us as police officers or detectives to show up to a scene and see people having Narcan there.
When you get to a more urban environment, you do tend to use Narcan a little more than someone out in the county or the country, but unfortunately it's an epidemic across the country that is getting worse. Unfortunately, here in Berks County, in the city, it has gotten a lot worse. I've used it in the last 15 years that I've been working on the ambulance, a lot more than I care to think about.
Our local EMS agency had trained us on how to properly administer Narcan, and then once a year for our certifications to keep our police certificate, we also every year do an update on the administration of Narcan.
When we got it in 2016, guys were like, well, I'm not doing that. Like, why would I do that? That's crazy. I'm not a doctor. I'm not trained. So we took like a 2-hour course to know how to stick it in somebody's nose and pull the plunger. But we didn't know what it was going to turn into. And now it's common. I mean, we do it all the time.
I think getting the buy-in was the biggest thing for law enforcement. Once the buy-in was there, when we first started this, the officers started deploying it in the field, and the buy-in was there. Like, hey, I just saved a life. That's a pretty powerful thing to walk away from.
Much like CPR provides a means by which individuals with a little bit of training can save a life, the ability to have Narcan easily accessible in the community allows individuals, again, with a little bit of training, a little bit of knowledge, to be able to save a life.
You roll up on a scene, you have a person who's unconscious, they're breathing, usually labor breathing, you hear snorting, which is typical for an opioid overdose. And something's really off and not right. They're in a medical emergency, and you deploy this stuff.
You guys on the street, we use it. We're going through all the time. And sometimes they don't know, right? It's an overdose. It looks like a younger person, that there's no medical history. There's no real reason why they should be on the floor, passed out, not breathing. So give them a dose. If it doesn't work, give them another dose. See if it works. And a lot of times it does. You had no idea, and all of a sudden now, hey, Jimmy's got a problem. And this is how we figured it out.
We saw a big change when fentanyl came around. When it was just straight heroin, that was one thing. But now with this fentanyl exposure, it's a whole new world, and it's a way more dangerous world out there.
It is safe to give multiple doses of Narcan if needed. Because some people think, I gave you one dose, it didn't have an effect, it's not working, it's something else. When in actuality, they may need a second dose of Narcan based on what the substance is that they ingested.
We go to a person who is unresponsive to a person who sometimes is disoriented and doesn't know where they are or what happened, which is typical, or someone who's arguing with us now because unfortunately, their high was just ruined by the Narcan that we delivered.
Most times, when you reverse an overdose, most people are not happy to see you. They're not necessarily always willing to go to the hospital, and unfortunately, we can't force them to go, and you have the family that sometimes wants them to go. And it can be heartbreaking for us because we want them to go, but we can't force them, and they'll want to stay, and we have no recourse but to let them stay. So we do encourage them to go to the hospital. If you can look at yourself in the mirror and honestly say that you've done the best you can and given your patient the best care that you can and advocated for them the best you can, then there's nothing else you can do. So, as long as you can say, hey, I've done everything humanly possible, then there's not much else you can do.
The Blue Cares program was a program that the County of Berks instituted to try to assist in overdose outreach. So if we show up to a scene, someone has overdosed, they're revived by the use of Narcan or other medical means, we then follow up with them. Police, counseling, to try to get them to understand that they did suffer a medical emergency and there is options to try to get themselves some help.
We try to give them a second chance. Rather than prosecute them for the crime of possession of drug paraphernalia or possession of a controlled substance, we try to get them treatment.
I think what this does is it shows the individual that there are people out there that do care, and despite maybe thinking that because they're law enforcement or because they're part of a different agency that there's no resources out there to help them, when we are here and we want to help them.
In my opinion, I think we need more help. We need people to be able to say, hey, come with me. Instead of going to jail, we're going to go talk to a counselor, right? And maybe that counselor can get through to them.
We are human beings. We care. We care a whole lot when we go out there to save a life, to help an individual. And so when we see those individuals that appear to not care themselves, we begin to have our own role in putting a stigma on another individual.
I've only been a police officer for 6 years, and I've had a significant amount of overdoses and administration of Narcan, and I've seen people become agitated when they wake. I've seen people be disoriented, groggy, confused. I've seen double overdoses, a husband-wife couple who overdosed in a park.
In my experience, I personally have used Narcan a handful of times. In particular, one time in 2018, there was a call at a local restaurant for an individual that had appeared to have overdosed in the bathroom. I was the first officer on scene. The bathroom stall was locked. I was able to look underneath and see that he was overdosed on the floor. We opened the door, was able to get him out, administered one Narcan. Fire personnel arrived, as well as Western Berks ambulance. They administered another and saved his life.
I've given someone Narcan the same time in the same place two or three times in 24 hours. Like, what am I doing anything good? That can get in your mind, and that's a dangerous thought to have. What you have to remember is, and something, my wife reminded me, maybe you give them that extra hour, maybe you give them that extra day, maybe they can make peace with their maker, maybe they can make peace with their family, maybe they will turn around. People have turned around. It is possible.
It's a disease process, and it may take multiple times for that patient or that person to recover. And we can't lose sight of that. While it may be hard and we may get fatigued at that, but we have to realize that that's a part of the process. And that gives us strength to move on to the next patient to help them.
I think every day that you go to work, you need to go with a clean slate, have a fresh mind, and be aware that you may have to deal with an overdose. And the way I look at that is that on a day where I don't want to deal with that or deal with an overdose, this is something I signed up for, something I love doing, and I want to give back. And when I get called, most likely it's on someone's worst day. And in this case, this is a prime example of what a worst day could look like. That's also someone else's child. And it's not my place to judge someone on their issues, but I did make a promise that I would help people in their lowest times.
There's a saying that I use a lot. I didn't get in this job, and no one that stays in this profession isn't in it unless you want to help people. It's not my job to play judge and jury. It's not my job to be the decider of life or death. That's not my job. So if there's someone that's in need in an emergency, it's my job. It's the oath that I took to help them.
As we know, our EMS services, including the administration of naloxone, are just the first step. Treatment and recovery from substance use disorders has many pathways.